The Galactic Commerce Authority did not expect resistance. That, in hindsight, was their first and most spectacular mistake. My name is Vrex Dolan, Senior Acquisition Surveyor for the GCA, and I am filing this report from a hospital bed on the station orbiting what used to be a perfectly ordinary backwater planet. My left antenna is bandaged. My pride, however, cannot be bandaged. It had been surgically removed by a species that, according to our database, was classified as pre-warp, primitive, low threat, expected compliance, 99.7%. That remaining 0.3% nearly killed me. Let me explain how we arrived here. 3 standard cycles ago, the GCA identified Sol System as a prime acquisition target. The planet third from the star, Earth, had been flagged for its enormous resource potential, its breathable nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, and its conveniently distracted population, who were, at the time of our initial survey, arguing passionately with each other over something called the comment section. Our analysts concluded that a species that's divided amongst itself would practically hand over the deed to their world for a moderately shiny object and the promise of free parking in the outer belt. The acquisition protocol was simple. We had done it 412 times before. You fly in, you make contact, you present the galactic deed of transfer, you get one representative to sign it, and then you spend the next century quietly relocating the native population to a designated resettlement moon while you harvest the good stuff. 412 times. Not a single complication worth noting. So we sent Acquisition Team 7, led by Commander Zorak Peth, who had personally overseen the smooth purchases of the Lelian homeworld, the twin moons of Batura, and an entire archipelago civilization on Prism, for who signed everything over in exchange for a recipe they called intergalactic chili, which Zorak told them did not exist, and then immediately had our chef recreate because it smelled extraordinary. Zorak descended to Earth with 6 surveyors, a portable translation matrix, and what he described in his preliminary report as, and I quote, an overwhelmingly confident attitude. First contact was made in a field outside a mid-sized human settlement called Tulsa. The locals who witnessed the landing did not scatter in fear. They did not bow. They did not, as several previous acquisitions had done, immediately offer tribute in the form of their youngest and most attractive citizens. They pulled out small rectangular devices and started filming. Zorak, his second, a young surveyor named Kip Venn, reportedly said, "Why are they smiling?" Zorak had no answer for that. The human who approached first was a short, wide-shouldered woman with hair the color of an oxidizing copper pipe. Her name, we later learned, was Bertie Falco. She was a retired postal worker from the outskirts of Tulsa, and she had been, at the precise moment of our ship's descent, sitting in a lawn chair eating something called a hot link. She set down the hot link. She looked at our ship, then at Zorak, then at the 6-limbed form of Kip Venn, then back at Zorak. "Well," said Bertie Falco, finally, Zorak activated the translation matrix. He straightened his formal sash, the one that displayed 17 medals of acquisition excellence, and he delivered the opening line that had worked 412 times. "Greetings, indigenous organism. Your world has been selected for acquisition by the Galactic Commerce Authority. Resistance is statistically inadvisable." Bertie Falco looked at him for a long moment. "Honey," she said, "have you talked to a lawyer?" Zorak had not talked to a lawyer. In 412 acquisitions, the concept of a lawyer had never once come up. Within 48 Earth hours, it came up 8,000 times. The humans did not panic. They did not comply. They did not, as our behavioral model predicted, fracture along their existing fault lines of nationality and religion and language, and spend their final free days fighting each other. Something strange happened instead. Something our entire psychological database had no category for. They got organized. Not perfectly. Not quietly. Good Lord, not quietly. There were protests and counter-protests and 17 different online petitions, and one very loud argument on something called a podcast that was listened to by 60 million people simultaneously. But underneath all of that beautiful, magnificent noise, something was moving. Something was being built. Zorak sent me his field report on day 3. It was 3 words long. Send more staff. I was on the next shuttle down. The first thing I noticed when I landed was a banner strung between two trees at the perimeter of our negotiation zone. It read, in large, cheerful letters, "Welcome to Earth. We have lawyers, coffee, and absolutely no intention of leaving." And standing directly beneath that banner, arms crossed, wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than our shuttle's fuel cell, was a man named Otto Cray. Otto Cray was 39 years old, a constitutional and international law specialist, and he had apparently not slept in 72 hours, which impossibly only seemed to have sharpened him. His eyes had the particular brightness of a being who has found something deeply interesting to do and fully intends to do it until someone physically removes him from the situation. He looked at me. He looked at my clipboard, which contained the deed of transfer. He said, "You got a Section 12 filing?" Because the GCA Interstellar Commerce Code, which I spent the last 3 days reading in its entirety, requires a Section 12 voluntary consent filing before any inhabited planetary transfer can be legally binding. I don't see one. Do you have one? I did not have one. We had never needed one before. No, I said. Otto Cray smiled the smile of a man who has, at this precise moment, every advantage in the room. Great, he said. Then we need to talk. Nobody had ever sat across a negotiating table from us before. In 412 acquisitions, the table had always been a formality, a surface upon which to place the deed, watch it get signed, take a photograph of the GCA quarterly newsletter, and leave. The table was not a battleground. The table was a prop. Otto Cray had turned the table into a battleground. He brought 4 colleagues. 2 were lawyers. 1 was a linguist who had apparently learned enough of our base trade dialect in 4 days to catch mistranslations in real time. And the 4th was a small, quiet woman named Dr. Sarah Mean, who was introduced only as a philosopher, which I initially dismissed as decorative, and which I would spend the rest of the week bitterly regretting. We sat down on day 4 what the humans had already named, with characteristic self-congratulation, the summit. Zorak opened. He was calm. He was professional. He had done this 412 times. The Galactic Commerce Authority, Zorak began, hereby presents a formal deed of planetary transfer, authorizing the acquisition of the Sol 3 body, colloquially designated Earth, in exchange for resettlement provisions, a standard resource credit allocation, and full GCA membership status for the relocated population. Otto Cray looked at the deed. He looked at it the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, clinically, quietly, with total focus. Paragraph 9, he said, resource credit allocation. What is the conversion rate to your standard unit of currency? Zorak blinked. The allocation is generous by galactic standards. I did not ask if it was generous. Otto said pleasantly. I asked for the conversion rate. Zorak told him. Otto wrote it down without reacting. He showed it to his colleague on the left, a man named Piers Vola, who also wrote it down without reacting, which was somehow more unsettling than if they had both stood up and screamed. And the resettlement moon, Otto continued. Designation? Gilunsaitsemen. Atmospheric composition? Breathable. Gravity. Zorak paused. Just slightly. 0.8 standard. 0.8 of whose standard? Another pause. Galactic standard, which is calculated based on the average gravity of the 17 founding GCA member worlds. Yes? Otto looked up for the first time. Founding members whose average planetary mass is approximately 1.4 times that of Earth, meaning your 0.8 standard translates to roughly 1.1 times Earth's current gravity, which is, for species that evolve in Earth standard conditions, meaningfully uncomfortable over generational timescales and clinically linked in your own GCA health documentation, which I have also read, to joint degradation and reduce cardiovascular efficiency in species with our skeletal density. The room was silent. Piers Vola was still writing. He had not looked up once. We can, Zorak said carefully, discuss alternatives. We certainly can, said Otto. Let us also discuss Article 7, Clause 3, subsection F of the GCA Inhabited World Protections Charter, which states that no indigenous population may be relocated without a supermajority consent vote of no less than 67% of the adult population, conducted in each native language, with minimum of 180 standard days allowed for deliberation. Zorak stared at him. You have, Otto continued, pulling out a printed document that was somehow already highlighted and tabbed. Been operating on assumption of consent. You have not obtained consent. You have, in fact, by landing an acquisition team before filing the Section 12 and before conducting the consent vote, technically committed what Article 2 of the same charter describes as a premature entry violation, which carries a fine of 40,000 galactic credits per day of unauthorized presence. He looked up with calm, pleasant eyes. You have been here for 4 days. The linguist quietly confirmed the translation. Dr. Sarah Mean, the philosopher, had not said a single word yet. She was watching Zorak the way you might watch a building that is about to, very slowly, fall over. Zorak turned to me. I turned to the ceiling. The ceiling offered no assistance. The fine, I said quietly, would currently be 160,000 credits. And climbing, said Otto, back on the station, I sent my own field report to GCA headquarters. Unlike Zorak's, it was considerably longer than 3 words. It contained 17 pages of legal citations I had never previously encountered, a cause projection spreadsheet prepared by Piers Vola, that one of our analysts later described as disturbingly thorough, and a single personal note at the end that read, "These people are going to own us if we are not careful." Headquarters sent back one line. Proceed with negotiation. Do not sign anything. Day 7 was when Dr. Sarah Mean finally spoke. We had reached an impasse on the Section 12 filing timeline. Zorak had suggested a compressed deliberation window of 30 days. Otto had cited the 180-day minimum. They had been circling the same disagreement for 2 days, politely, without resolution, like 2 ships going around the same buoy forever. Dr. Sarah Mean set down her water glass. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Her voice was quiet and very precise. In your 412 previous acquisitions, did any of those civilizations believe that their existence had intrinsic value independent of their utility to the GCA? The question landed in the room, like something dropped from a great height. All civilizations have value. Zorak said carefully. "That is not what I asked," said Sarah. "I asked whether they believed it, whether they had been told it, whether their entire cultural framework had spent centuries building the philosophical infrastructure to argue it." She looked at him calmly. "Because we have a word for it. We have about 600 words for it. In fact, across our languages, and every legal document, every rights charter, every philosophical tradition Otto is currently using to bury you in citations, came from that one foundational belief, that we matter. Not because we are useful, because we are." There was a very long silence. That, I said, to no one in particular, was not in our survey data. "No," said Bertie Falco, who had somehow been admitted to the room on day 3 and had since taken up permanent residence in the corner chair with a thermos of coffee and the expression of a woman watching her favorite sports team win a championship. "I imagine it wasn't. The negotiations lasted 41 more days. At the end of them, the GCA did not acquire Earth. What we got instead was a trade partnership agreement, drafted by Otto Cray, reviewed by Piers Vola, philosophically stress-tested by Dr. Sarah Mean, and notarized by Bertie Falco, who had at some point become the unofficial 6th member of the human delegation, and whom I strongly suspect had been the strategic mastermind all along. The agreement gave the GCA limited resource access to 3 uninhabited asteroid belts in the outer system, in exchange for technology transfers, 2 seats on the GCA Commerce Council, and a formal written apology for the premature entry violation. The 160,000 credit fine was paid in full. The GCA press office described the outcome as a mutually beneficial partnership and a fine example of interstellar cooperation. Headquarters described it internally as the most expensive survey mission in GCA history. I describe it as the day we learned that 0.3% is not a rounding error. Zorak retired shortly after, not bitterly. He told me, the last time I saw him, that it was the best negotiation he had ever been part of, even from the losing side. He said he had learned more in those 41 days than in 412 acquisitions. He said Earth was extraordinary. He also said he had developed a deep and personal attachment to something called a hot link, and was exploring whether Bertie Falco would be willing to provide the recipe. She was She charged him 40,000 credits for it. He paid without argument. And somewhere in the outer belt, in 3 asteroid fields that now generate enough revenue to fund half the GCA's eastern sector operations, a species that was classified as pre-war, primitive, low threat, and an expected compliance of 99.7% continues to exist exactly where it always has, on a planet they kept, because they read the manual. And then, very calmly, they used it